some of us get really invested in the lives of our animals, and emotionally we become attached to them. We're training with them, we're building relationships. We're upset when they are sick. We are happy when they hit certain milestones. We have these relationships with animals that are very emotionally taxing sometimes, especially when we deal with death and it's an animal maybe we work closely with. And being a mom and having to be at work and deal with potentially an emergency vet situation, and maybe one that doesn't end well with the death of an animal that you really loved working with, and then having to go home to your children who don't understand what happened, and maybe they're either too young to understand or it's just not something you're sharing.
Welcome to another episode of Animals, Nature, and You. I'm your host, Rick Schwartz, and of course, I am very glad you're here. This particular conversation today, I think, is very important. Whether you work in the zoo or aquarium world, or you're just thinking about getting into it, whether you work in conservation or you're just thinking about getting into it, whether you are just a fan of animals and wildlife and zoos and aquariums and conservation, I think this is important because this conversation really focuses on the fact that there is a human element to those that do this kind of work, that have this kind of living. There is this push and pull, this tug of war that can occur between someone who is incredibly passionate about the work they do, that their work is not just a day job, but it is very much woven into the fabric of who they are. But as their life grows and they have a family, that can sometimes cause an internal struggle, finding the energy and time and balance for raising kids, for being pregnant if you're a female, to then also still showing up with that passion and fire for your job, because it's not just a job for you. It's a way of life, perhaps. So with that, this really cool podcast exists. The Mothering Wildlife podcast is conversation after conversation with somebody who is a mom, who works in the zoo world, who's reaching out to other moms, from zookeeper to supervisors to managers, people who've worked their way up through the process of growing their family and getting together and having these conversations about what are some of the ups and downs, what are some of the challenges. And perhaps from the outside, you might not think this is unique, but as a dad and as someone who's worked alongside with women who have gone from being single to married to then having kids and being pregnant and everything else, I have been able to see how that can offer unique challenges. Unique not only because your body changes, but unique also because of the line of work that we are in. And so these conversations, I think, are very valuable and very important. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk to Elizabeth Johnson, the host of Mothering Wildlife podcast. And she has been in the zoo field for 20 years and is a mom of 2 boys, so she's no stranger to being a working mother in the zoo world. Now, the zoo and aquarium field is filled with dedicated and passionate people, like I mentioned, that are also faced within, when it's time to become a parent, there are particular challenges, whether it's schedule, compassion fatigue, finances, work-life balance, like we also touched on too, where it's not just work and life. There's all sorts of stuff, but we'll get into that in the conversation. So on her podcast, Elizabeth shares the stories of moms working in the zoo field, focusing on how they navigate caring for wildlife and caring for kids. And I might even add, there's that challenge of caring for yourself while caring for so many others. So with that, Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to being on the podcast and joining me here today on Animals, Nature, and You.
I am really excited to be here, so thank you so much for allowing me to come on and talk to you.
Well, of course, like I mentioned in the intro, you have your own podcast, Mothering Wildlife Podcast, and I listened to quite a few episodes because there's a lot, even as a dad, that I could relate to that you cover in this podcast, the challenges of the schedule, the challenges of the income, and everything that goes with that. And then, of course, I think, people usually get into animal care because they are a heart-centered, caring person. So then you bring your own children into the fold. It makes it sometimes seem like a tug of war. Before we get into all that you have covered and all that you do, the community that you've created, I do want to ask, though, what was the kickoff point for this? Why start a podcast? Why create this community?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I kind of felt after the birth of my second son. So I have 2 children. I have 2 boys. One's 10, one is 5 now. But after the birth of my second son, which was during COVID, I had a good friend that I worked with at the Naples Zoo where I was, and her and I would just talk back and forth of, oh my gosh, like I can't believe we're doing this job and raising kids. Like it's so hard. She was a vet, and it's just a lot of caring. You're caring for wildlife. We were going home and we were caring for children. We're physically demanding in our jobs and emotionally and mentally. There's just a lot going on. And so we found comfort in each other and talking to each other. And one day the idea was like, maybe we should just have a podcast about this. Maybe we just need to talk to other moms who are going through the same thing and try to build this community because I know we're not alone in this. And
Yeah.
so we kind of talked about doing this podcast together. Ultimately, obviously it's me now, I'm solo, but that's kind of how the idea for the podcast started, was just wanting to talk to other moms who were experiencing similar things that that we were at work, and knowing that we weren't the only ones out there, and that surely there was some sort of, I don't want to say commiserating because that sounds so negative, but surely there was some sort of way for, us to just tell our stories and to feel like we could see each other in each other's stories and share ideas and just talk about it, because there is such comfort sometimes in talking to someone else who is in a similar situation to you. So that's how it came
Oh,
about.
absolutely. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to say it's absolutely. There is. Yeah, I know you were kind of shying away from the term commiserating, but deeper than, I mean, it is, maybe perhaps you can on the surface call it that, but I think the
Mhm.
reality, you just really nailed it. It's that need to be able to recognize you're not alone in these
Yeah.
struggles, and yet I think because it's a zookeeping world, it already feels like a very niche space that a lot of people
Mhm.
don't understand that lifestyle. They don't understand the fact that it doesn't matter what the weather is, what the
Yeah.
emergency might be, or whatever holiday or birthday or celebration that normally is recognized by the rest of
Mhm.
the populace. The animals still need the care. The animals still need the attention, and so you've committed to doing this, and you love it. But
Yeah.
also, yeah, there's that tug of war between what you love with your family and your kids. So I think I can absolutely understand the value that you initially tapped into there with this. Yeah, how many years have you been doing this program now?
Well, so we started in 2023 is when I released the first episode. And then my family and I actually moved from Florida to Texas in about early 2024. And so I kind of paused the podcast at that point
Mhm.
just to kind of move halfway across the
Life.
country, literally. And I intended to pick it back up, shortly after moving, but it ended up being a year because it turns out halfway across the country, when you move your family, there's a lot of things to go on and new schedules, and it just was hard to kind of get back into it. But then I started recording again and started putting out episodes again in 2025. And so now I've been back now for just about a year.
Mhm.
Um, I really wanted to keep it going during that time just because I was like, oh, I can do this, But again, the whole point of the podcast is being a mom and being a working mom. And so I think also recognizing when you're in certain seasons of life where that's just hard and maybe some things need to be put to the side is also really important. And we talk about that on the
Yeah,
podcast too. And,
yeah.
you hit the nail on the head earlier when you were talking about, just being in this field is so unique and special, and it is such a niche field. And talking to zoo moms, which, not to leave the dads out because they're definitely our dads. There's lots of different parents that are in this field, but having such a unique job and the challenges that come with a 24/7, 365-day field business, it just feels really special. And I wanted to highlight that there are really passionate, motivated women working in this field who are almost doing two jobs at once. And it's two unique jobs, being a mom and then also in this really cool field. So that was really important.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge that in this field, dads have many challenges also.
Of course.
But and I appreciate you mentioning that too. But the reality is, anybody doing this job, male or female, knows it's incredibly physically demanding on your body.
Hmm.
Being pregnant is incredibly physically demanding on a body. So it is unique to the mother side of things. From my perspective, having worked with women in the field who have gone from having a body that's never built another human to then going through that process, and then the other side of it, what the body goes through afterwards.
Hmm.
It is unique to women in that case, and I think that's worth acknowledging. That's part of the equation that you are tackling
Hmm.
with your conversations, and acknowledging that sometimes too, I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember the episode or the name of the lady, but she was talking about the challenges of just using the skip loader, I think it was, or a bobcat,
Yeah.
because her belly was too big, and
Yeah.
she was frustrated with that. And that's the other side of it too. Then the mentally taxing side of your body telling you, no, you can't do your job right
Hmm.
now.
Yes.
And so there's that battle that goes on, that you want to be a good mother, you want to take care of that baby in you, and yet also you want to do the job you've always done and that you love.
Hmm.
And again, not to discount or say it's less for dads when they are dealing with schedules and the care they want to bring to the home after an exhausting day of giving care at work. But I do see where it's different
Hmm.
for the moms, and even after that, you're
Yeah, I mean, it's just a
nursing and
different.
everything else.
Yeah, it's just a different experience, you know.
Yeah,
Like you said, it's not less than for dads, but it is a different experience. And I feel like on the front end of that, of the growing the baby side of it, the front end before you go off on leave, that's just
yeah,
a different experience. So yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I loved it. Again, I've only listened to a couple episodes, but I really love the conversations, and sort of that acknowledgement that
Hmm.
this is a unique space for moms.
Yeah.
And I know again, just from the dad side of it, and observing coworkers that have gone through the pregnancy while at work, there's also that, the year or two later, where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't, if but I would assume that there's that social pressure too that
Hmm.
is placed upon the concept of what a mom is, whether it is actually pressure you are experiencing as a mom, or the pressure you give yourself because we're raised in an environment and a society that has
Yes.
that expectation. It's different.
Yeah.
What's been your
Yeah. I
experience
mean,
with that?
moms put so much pressure and guilt on themselves that some of it is like you said, we're doing it to ourselves. Some of it is based from society and just culturally, the way that we live here in the United States. But it does impact the way you work sometimes. And it can you start the minute that you're pregnant and you're at work, and you can't participate fully like you might want to, or maybe you're put on some sort of bed rest, or maybe you're told to take it easy. The
Yeah.
guilt that you might be telling yourself, your inner dialogue can be so mean.
Oh,
When
yeah.
you feel like you're the weak link on a team, or like you are having to rest and someone else has to pick up your slack. I've heard so many moms tell me that that is really hard to deal with,
Yeah.
especially when they were very like robust prior to becoming pregnant and were physically really strong and were able to throw hay bales around and, get in skid
Right.
steer and scoop all of that poop. And it's like, when you realize you maybe can't do that, there's a lot of emotion and feelings that come with that. And a lot of that is guilt and shame. But that doesn't stop after you become a mom, and it doesn't stop after you're not pregnant anymore. And, even returning to work, then it just transfers to feeling guilty about leaving your child. And then it feels
Yeah.
guilty about the schedule accommodations that you might need as a working parent. And so a lot of it is placed on ourselves internally, but a lot of it does come from things that moms see on social media and, the way they hear other people talking about parenthood and motherhood, and it's just hard to escape. I don't know that you
Yeah.
can, but it's always there.
Well, I don't, yes, I agree. I don't think it is something that you can escape, because it is always there in many
Mhm.
different formats, from an advertisement for, a refreshing drink that'll put pep in mom's step, to,
Yeah.
social media expectations. But I do think that's where something like your podcast and the community that you're creating is so important,
Mhm.
because it sort of pushes that curtain aside that is very shiny on the outside, the stuff you see on Instagram, et cetera. That's the perfect day. That's the setup.
Yeah.
That's all that, versus having the opportunity to have these conversations.
Yeah.
But it's still, to your point, and I know this just from human behavior in general, is sometimes it's hard to get out of your own head, and be
Yeah.
able to accept your expectations of yourself are no longer applicable. You have to adjust
Mhm.
because your life
Mhm.
has changed, your body has changed.
Yeah.
I do
We
want to
talk.
ask you this. Oh, go ahead. No,
Oh,
go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was going to say we just talk a lot about moms and I talk a lot about being in certain seasons and how, your expectations do have to change when you're in a certain season of life. When you've got a newborn, that's a certain season. You've
Yeah.
got to change your expectation not only towards you and your behavior and what you can accomplish in a day, but towards what your life looks like in general, what your relationship with your partner is like. And then that changes 6 months later. It always does. And then you're in a new season with toddlerhood and you're maybe kind of more homebound and can't travel as much, and then that season changes and you got teenagers who have activities. So we talk a lot about the fact that there just are these different seasons of life and to kind of give yourself grace during those because
Yeah.
it's not going to look like maybe what you thought it looked like. And it also is going to be ever changing. So you just kind of have to give yourself that grace and flexibility. So yeah, the season metaphor works really well for parenthood.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and the unpredictability of season changes. As the
Yes, yes,
season changes, sometimes there's weird storms that occur.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
I mean, the analogy and metaphor just goes and goes and goes on that one
Yeah.
because it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you, because clearly you've had a lot more of these conversations than I have had. Again, I have worked with women who've gone through the pregnancy and all of that, but I'm not that. I'm not that. I've never experienced it myself, and I have not sat down and had these conversations like you have had. But when I was listening to one of your episodes, it made me think about that sometimes we compare ourselves to other people's experiences.
Mhm.
In your experience, in your conversations, through your journey of doing this podcast, has there ever been a time where perhaps someone's like, "Oh no, everything was fine, everything was great," versus someone else saying that there was just challenge after challenge with whatever it was, like you had mentioned, having to be bedridden for the last month or
Mhm.
whatever, where someone else is like, they're working up to 5 minutes before their water broke and they're still throwing bales, and other people look at that and go, "Oh, well, that's how it should be," or "I wish I could be like that." Is there ever
Yeah.
that dynamic? Because every pregnancy is different. Is there ever a challenge within the world of mothering wildlife where there's sometimes a false expectation because someone else had a different path?
I think that, as the host of the podcast, I try to be really open to listening to a mom's story, knowing that it could be hard to share or
Mm.
that it might be a different experience from even my own. Like, I don't want to go into hearing another woman's story with such a narrow lens that
Right,
I
right.
maybe ask a question that is either insensitive or kind of puts my own opinions on display
Mhm.
because the world of parenting is very diverse. And even online, you'll see the spectrum of opinions that can range on certain
Right.
topics like sleeping and feeding and breastfeeding. So I do like to kind of go into each, kind of interview with this open mind of this woman has her own experience to tell. I want her to feel comfortable talking about certain topics that I know could be challenging because they're emotional or maybe they bring up
Right.
memories that are hard to process, and she's sharing them in a very public forum. And I also want her to be true and to be able to share her story, knowing that others will listen to it, and maybe not every mother listening to it will have the same experience or maybe even agree with what she's talking about, but there probably is someone that is.
Yeah.
And so I feel kind of almost protective of my guests and, making sure that they're comfortable to tell their story and their true experience, because it can be really hard to speak up about what your personal experience has been as a mother, especially in the early stages with newborns, knowing that you might be judged and someone might not have had the same experience or might not think of it the same way. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it is interesting. And that actually makes me think, is there ever been, and I let me acknowledge too, I absolutely love your approach to your guests in the sense of recognizing their sensitivities, recognizing it's a unique situation and you don't want to project your own stuff on there. And so with that, then I do want to ask, has there ever been a guest or a story that you were completely surprised by the situation, or it was like, wow, I'd never even experienced or thought of that, never even heard that before? Or is it fairly universal, the experiences of the moms in the zoo world?
I mean, a lot of it is universal. We are all dealing with the same challenges. The part that is always kind of very different, and I have heard stories surrounding like pregnancy specifically, like things that go on during pregnancy and also birth, people giving birth and breastfeeding. That's another one.
Yeah.
There are some things that I have heard that I'm like, wow, like that was not my experience. And it was never thought in my mind that that was someone else's experience, where I have heard things and I'm like, oh my goodness, like that was a really hard, challenging thing that she went through, and I didn't even know in my mind that that was an option. It sounds probably the wrong word, but that was something that someone could experience or
Right.
have to go through.
Yeah.
So I definitely have heard those things, and then afterwards, I am always so appreciative and thankful. I'm like, "Thank you so much for sharing that," because that can be really hard. But yeah, I definitely do hear things. It has opened up my view kind of pregnancy in general, motherhood in general, everything that comes with it. It's really kind of like expanded my worldview on the topic because I only have my experience, and I knew that there were other moms out there, but it really I have heard a lot of things that I never maybe would have heard just talking to my own close inner circle of friends and family. But I love that. I love that I have kind of had some of my own views challenged.
Right. And that's what it's about when you're in a community, I
Hmm.
think, too, is being able to bring in someone else's experience and views and have yours perhaps challenged a little bit because that's where we grow. I think that's
Yeah.
wonderful. I do want to jump into, especially for anybody in my audience. So my audience is made up of a wide variety of people and
Hmm.
ages, some in the zoo world, some not. Someone might be listening to this, well, I don't, thinking I don't get it, I don't understand. And what the challenges are. Obviously, we've kind of touched on that. It's a physically
Hmm.
challenging job. The body goes through changes. Um, I have something that came to mind that would be something perhaps someone in an office job wouldn't expect. But I don't want to spill those beans just yet. I want to ask you, if, through all of this, could you sort of paint a general picture of what some of the more common challenges are for a mother in the zoo and
Hmm.
conservation world, honestly, even
Yeah.
aquariums too. What would be some of the challenges that someone faces going through the process of pregnancy to motherhood that may not be obvious to someone outside of our
Hmm.
world?
I kind of think of them as being in like three buckets. There's the physical challenges, then there's the mental challenges, and then there's the emotional challenges.
Mhm.
Physically, we have very demanding jobs. But within the zoo field, the physicality from one animal care specialist to the next also varies. I've worked with hoof stock my whole entire career. That's a lot of work. There's a lot of hay and raking and mucking and pushing heavy wheelbarrows and throwing hay bales and grain bags, 50 pounds plus around and trying to set up a barn. So there are lots of physical challenges that might differ from someone who takes care of reptiles or small mammals. But even then, you've got bending and stooping. And as your
Yeah.
belly gets larger, it's hard to do those things in that aspect of our job, climbing ladders, working with hot wire. I got zapped by hot wire when I was early in my pregnancy with my second child. It was containing a tiger. So, there's things that you don't think about at a corporate job or an office job
Right.
that you're exposing yourself to as a pregnant woman in the workplace at a zoo or aquarium. The aquarium, that's another really great one. I've talked to some aquarium moms. They do a lot of diving, which they're not allowed to do when they're pregnant. Um, a lot of their procedures, vet procedures, are in the water, and so they're dealing with certain meds that are within the water that they can't be in the water. So it's those types of little things that I try to highlight sometimes on the podcast of what is going on physically. But that's
Mhm.
just one of the columns. Mentally and emotionally, when you care for any other living being, whether it's, nurses caring for humans or us caring for wildlife, you are always going to have lots of feelings that are surrounding caring for that individual. Some of us get really invested in the lives of our animals and emotionally we become attached to them. We're training with them, we're building relationships. We're upset when they are sick. We are happy when they hit certain milestones. We have these relationships with animals that are very emotionally taxing sometimes, especially when we deal with death and it's an animal maybe we worked closely with. And being a mom and having to be at work and deal with potentially an emergency vet situation, and maybe one that doesn't end well with the death of an animal that you really loved working with, and then having to go home to your children who don't understand what happened. And maybe they're either too young to understand or it's just not something you're sharing with your family, but to have those emotions and to feel like you maybe need to set them aside for a bit so you can just fulfill your duties as mom, that's really, really hard in trying to have that grieving process broken up almost by having to care for children. And mentally, just moms have a mental load. They've got a checklist. Let's be real that a lot of times they're keeping in their heads, and often surrounding kids, it has to deal with activities and doctor's appointments and, getting new shoes because you recognize this morning that your kid's toes are sticking out, stuff like that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got that on the checklist now. I need to pay attention to it. As your kids get older, a lot of it comes with helping to manage their own little social lives and play dates and making sure that school is going well and they're not having trouble. So it's just a lot that within this field, I think, is just exacerbated by the fact that we're caring for living animals, and that part of your job is hard to turn off. Um, Work-life balance is a huge buzzword that we throw around, and I just spoke to just an interview yesterday, and we talked a lot about this. Is it even really a balance? And is that something that you can just leave work at work and then leave home at home? And I don't think you can. Our personal lives are important and they often sometimes bleed into work and sometimes work bleeds into home life. And that's just the way it is. But, in terms of being in this field, it really is the crutch of it is the fact that we're caring for not human, but living beings. And that takes a certain toll on you mentally and emotionally and physically. So,
Yeah. And just to sort of reemphasize what you mentioned there is on that emotional side of things, it is, and you said living human, but then corrected yourself because they're not humans. But I think that's important. That little slip of words there does highlight the fact for anybody who is not in this field, who does not or has not started in this journey yet of working with animals, the relationship we have with the animals in our care, they are extended family. You can't get
mhm,
around that.
yeah.
You are with them sometimes more than you are with your own family because you're with these animals during the waking hours and caring for them, and you know everything about them. Some of them you get to see from the day they're born to the day they have their own kids, and
hmm
it is an extended family. And so it's almost like you go from caring for your family at home to caring for your family at work.
hmm
And yes, I think most people can recognize my personal life sometimes bleeds into my work. You have a bad breakup, or you have a joyous moment in your relationship, you have whatever. You tell your coworkers, like, oh, congratulations, your kid's graduating from fifth grade, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
But then the other side of that, I think for a corporate job, for a job where you're interfacing with like, and nothing against insurance, but just say you work for an insurance company.
hmm
Rarely, unless there's some sort of office drama, is that going to spill into your personal life and disrupt your
Right.
personal life. Whereas a sick animal, an injured animal, a new birth, a possible passing away, that takes its emotional toll on you, and it is very hard to
hmm
compartmentalize that and leave it at work. And to your point, work-life balance, is there really such a thing? To me, in my opinion, in my experience, when I sit with that, and having been in the business for 30 plus years, I think what has to, well, at least let me say this, what worked for me, it was stepping back and recognizing that it's not work-life balance, as in those are the only two things you're balancing. It is you have a life and work is part of many
hmm
components of your life. And we need to, or at least for me, I needed to be able to say that is one portion, that is 1/6 or 1/8 of my life.
Yeah.
There's there's so much more to me than just that. But I will say too, as a zookeeper, as someone in that field, it does so very much become a part of our
Yeah.
personal identity, not just work. It is a work of passion. It's a work of you're with family. It becomes deeply interwoven.
Yeah.
So that is challenging. And I appreciate that you are taking this podcast and having these conversations. Not only are they important for those you're interviewing, I'm sure, but also for those who get to listen. I think it's really
hmm
wonderful.
We do talk about the identity piece a lot because, like you said, this field is a field of passion, and the people in it love what they do, and they got into it because they love animals and conservation, and they feel like that is such a big piece of their identity and who they are. Similarly, when you become a mom,
All
That
right.
also is very much an identity. And, you embrace this identity of mother. I mean, biologically, there's so many changes that happen in the brain when you become a mom that you literally aren't the same person you were prior
Right.
to having children.
Whether you like it or not.
I mean, you physically, biologically, you're not. You've got more. You've got the cells of your children in your blood, and your brain is different. It's changed. Hormones do crazy things, but that motherhood identity is so strong. It's similar in my brain to the identity of becoming a zookeeper.
Right.
And a lot of the conversation surrounding the beginning of this podcast with friends and family was, I almost feel like these two identities are clashing, and I
Mhm.
don't know how to make them merge a little bit, because it does feel like I'm just swinging back and forth between two different people, because these two identities are so strong, like in my mind. And for some women, it's really hard to grapple with those identities. And then, when you throw in the thought of motherhood being maybe a reason for leaving the zoo field and leaving behind that
Right.
zookeeper identity, then you open up a whole new can of worms. So,
Yeah, and I really like how you said that, where it's almost like there's two different people that you're trying to be at the same time. And
mhm,
I totally get that in the sense that I know going into the zoo field early on, it was, what do I need to do to be a good zookeeper? What do I need to
yeah,
learn? How do I need to show up? What do I need to be able to do on the job? And so you're always kind of checking in with yourself. What can I do to improve? What am I being a good zookeeper? Am I really taking care of this animal properly? And then, gosh, how many times do we beat ourselves up if we miss one little thing, whether
hmm
it was a bad stool or, whatever it might be, like, oh, I can't believe I missed that. Oh, that's so, and we beat ourselves up because in our mind, we're not being a good zookeeper. Now
yeah,
you bring in parenthood, and especially like you said, as a mother, so much changes in you. You're constantly checking in. Am I being a good mom? Am I being a good parent? Is this congruent to my expectations of being a good
hmm
parent? And so how could it not create a situation where these things are at odds, because you need to be on call 24/7 for your kids, and you need to be on call 24/7 for your animals,
yeah.
and they don't live in the
That
same
leads to
place.
burnout.
Right, right, exactly. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so since you mentioned burnout, and I'm sure that comes up. I know it came up a couple times in the episodes I listened to. What are some of the things that you have discovered about helping to manage burnout in these conversations you've had?
Well, I think that we need more conversation about it for maybe parents in general and moms, and how you can kind of manage it within your personal life as it pertains to work and vice versa. It's hard because you can't physically live these two roles at 100%
Right.
all the time. Um, and you will get burnt out because it's just impossible. In my own life, I try really hard to try to be present where I am at that physical moment in time, and that does seem to help. If I'm at work, I'm at work, and I'm trying really hard to, dedicate my time and energy and thoughts to that. And when I'm at home, I try really hard to be present with my kids, because ultimately, I don't want me not being present to kind of contribute to that feeling of burnout. And I'm trying to catch up, and I'm trying to do it all, and I just can't. And then it spirals from there. But burnout is tricky, and there are some great organizations within the zoo field, like Grays, that address this topic with animal care professionals, and how to kind of recognize the signs and what you can do to try to kind of mitigate that and to help
Mhm.
your thoughts. But I think just having the conversation about it and talking more about it, especially in this field, and with moms in general, and kind of supporting those who maybe are recognizing certain signs of burnout, is the most important thing that you can do. But I don't know that there's an easy kind of, I wish there was a nice easy
Oh,
solution
yeah.
too.
Well, yeah. Well, I think I totally understand. Yes, I think we wish there was a quick bippity boppity boo and it's all taken
Right.
care of. But I think that's the I think that's what makes burnout sort of that slippery fish. Is it's different
Yeah.
for everybody, and it can be
Yes.
different one month for you as it is on another month, because it depends on
Yeah.
what's going on, what the history is there too. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do agree. I think it's that opportunity to talk about it, to converse about it, to share individual experiences and listen to other experiences
hmm
that is so important. I know for me, it is also acknowledging and just admitting I've overextended myself. I need to
Yes.
stop this is
Yeah.
not working for me. What I'm doing is not working for me. And I think that was for me that when I hit my big sort of wall a couple years back. Well, gosh, more than a couple years back now, but time flies. But it was really just that finally admitting I cannot work at this pace anymore in the sense of work. I can't exist at this pace anymore, that there's too much and I need to stop, take care of myself and ask for help and reassess my priorities, because burnout leads to health issues. And once that goes, once you've lost your health, you can't show up anymore for your animals or for your family like you have been trying to push yourself to do. So
yeah, it's a very important topic in this field. I'm actually really glad that the field in general has trended toward mental health support for animal care specialists and people who are working, not just the animal care specialists, but you've got all sorts of roles within the zoo field, because I think it's time to recognize that this is a unique field and role that most people play, and there's a lot more to it, and we need a little bit of support sometimes and to talk about it in order to kind of process what we're doing day to day in our job. So
right, absolutely, because another big one, parent or not, compassion fatigue. And so you take that as being something that I think everybody at some point in time experiences in the zookeeping and conservation world. That's a whole nother topic. We're not going to go dive in.
Exactly.
That's a whole other episode. But just saying that is a component of that line of work anyway. And so you're going to hit that eventually. So now when you hit compassion fatigue, for whatever reason it might be in your career, now also being a parent where you have those responsibilities, you have to show up that way. It can be challenging. I know plenty of people in the field where it's also taken toll on personal relationships, not even as a parent, but then you throw in that responsibility and expectation of being a good parent too. And it adds so much more to that equation. I think your podcast and your approach here and the conversations you've been having is so needed. It's such a needed component.
Thanks.
I'm really glad you're doing it. If people wanted to, I'll obviously have in the episode notes how to find your podcast. And you included also your social media. Is there anywhere else you'd like to direct people to, or other things? You'd mentioned Graze. Is there anything else as far as tools or resources that you would like to share?
Graze is a great resource. They, I believe at one point in time even had some conversations surrounding parenthood. But, I really try to, direct most of my guests and try to build this community online on Instagram. The parenting community is huge. But, we're trying really hard to keep it specific to like zoo moms so that, there is kind of that like relativity. There's a little bit more understanding. So, finding the podcast on Instagram is a great way to kind of follow around with other people who are within that community, and as well as Facebook, but I'm trying to push it over to Instagram. Listening to the podcast, I've had so many moms actually email me or message me and say, I just listened to such and such episode and I was crying because I felt so seen. And,
So
I
important.
just,
So
or I
important.
just felt like, even before I had children, I listened to the podcast because I was just curious what I was getting myself into, and I wanted to hear what other moms in the field had to
Yeah.
say. And so I kind of knew a little bit about what I was doing. I had another mom tell me that she decided to have a second child because she listened to the podcast and she thought she could do it because she'd heard other moms talk about it. So, just listening to that podcast, I think, is a great resource. And not just because I'm the host of it and I make it, but like truly, I know that it is important to other people. It was just because of the feedback I've received. So,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a great resource. And I just remember, when I was listening to the episodes, it made me kind of recall back in my mind. So I was a zookeeper officially zookeeper title from 2000 to 2010, and then was still working with other zookeepers and animal behaviorists then for another however many years, it's been 16 or whatever. And then prior to that, in animal care, not as a zookeeper, but working with domestic animals and then working with a group of birds as a wildlife specialist. And your stories and what I was listening to made me recall those moments where I was working with someone who was going through pregnancy, or someone who was, had a toddler who was having to be picked up from preschool early because they bit somebody or whatever,
right?
And
You
those
never
challenges
know.
that occur and how hard that has to be. And then again, too, my own experiences as a parent, but having not gone through pregnancy, I know it's completely different. I'm not even going to try and pretend that I have
It's
a
still a
grasp of that
valid
experience.
because you guys have, there's challenges all around, like we talked about. And even if you're
Yeah.
not the birthing person, like you're
Right,
still, you're still
exactly.
in it, you're still living it.
Yeah. Well, and then one thing that you had brought up about people listening to it before they got pregnant, I do want to ask you as we kind of wrap this up, if you could give a nugget of advice for anybody either starting their journey into the zookeeper world that also knows eventually they want a family, or somebody who is in the zookeeping world who is now really seriously considering starting a family, what would be a nice nugget of advice that you would like to share with them from something you've learned and all you've done so far?
I mean, I think the best thing to tell someone is that if you want to be a parent, if you want to be a mom, do it. Try to shut out all of the chatter surrounding being a working mom. And that sounds counterintuitive to what we try to do on the Mothering Wildlife podcast, but there's so much chatter in the world about doing it right and doing it at the right time and making sure your finances are in order and making sure, we're not millionaires in this field. If you want to be a mom, do it. It's not impossible. There are plenty of working moms out there. You need to just be cognizant of what you are getting into and your expectations for yourself and what your life might look like afterwards and what your life is as a working mom. But don't overthink it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is don't overthink it. Don't do your deep dive rabbit hole researches. Just you do the thing, have the children. If you want to have the children, there's plenty of support out there in the field and out of the field, even with family and friends to help you through this season of life. But just don't try to overthink it because we get so caught up in these big decisions and whether we should do the thing or not. And that can sometimes just give us, decision paralysis. But
Yeah.
just do it. Know what you're
Just
getting
do it.
into, but just do it.
Right, right. Well, I love that, and I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast, and I think it's an important conversation that is right up there with the importance of having conversations around burnout and compassion fatigue and all of that, because it is a big thing.
Mhm.
You said it so well. It's this tug of war between being a good mom and being a good zookeeper and what are our own personal expectations on
Yeah.
that and everything else. So I really appreciate that you are having these conversations and you've created this space where this community can show up and learn from each other and share and I will say commiserate, because sometimes
Yeah.
you've got to commiserate
Sometimes you have to.
to also then appreciate the fact
Yeah.
that you aren't
Yeah.
alone in what you're going through. So I think that's wonderful. I just can't thank you enough for all that you're doing, and I hope that you continue to get the feedback, because I know a lot of times in podcasting we're just broadcasting out and you
Yeah.
never know the impact unless someone takes the time to write a note or an email. So I'm glad you are getting that feedback, and I hope you continue to get more of it, because I do think this is an important topic, especially for the field of zookeeping and those that are in the aquarium world as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for saying that. And also thank you for having me on so that I can, share the good world about being a mom in this field and to talk a little bit about it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And real quick, for anybody listening who maybe can't check the show notes right now, what is the Instagram handle?
You can find us at Mothering Wildlife. And then also I have Gmail, motheringwildlife@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with me. So.
Perfect. And I will have all of that information in the show notes below. So again, Elizabeth, thank you so very much for taking the time to be on Animals, Nature, and You.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you, dear listeners. As always, I appreciate you joining me on this curious odyssey that we call Animals, Nature, and You. And I do hope this conversation with Elizabeth, whether you're in the zoo and aquarium world or just thinking about it, or you're a parent or not, I do hope this conversation with Elizabeth and discussing her podcast, Mothering Wildlife, has given you a little insight and something to consider and think about the people behind the scenes at zoos and aquariums and even in conservation. It is a very different world to work in. It is absolutely one of passion and one that we love. And I think that's why there is that push-pull sometimes. When you're growing your life, you get into a relationship, you grow a family, you are also passionate about that too. And it's not that anyone in this world is looking for special treatment on these things. It is just acknowledging, perhaps even for ourselves, that it's important to realize the unique experience, the unique situation, and I'd have to even say the very, very important part of taking care of ourselves so we can keep taking care of our kids and our animals and everything else that's our responsibility. It's that work-life balance we talked about. I do stand by what I said in the interview. It is our life, and work is a component. It's not either or. It's not a work-life balance. There is your your friends, there's your family, and your kids, or maybe you don't have kids, your dogs and cats at home. There's your personal health and your well-being. There's being mindful of your finances. There's all of these things that are part of our life. And like Elizabeth said, there are seasons where we have to focus on one part or focus on another, and those seasons are always changing, and there's value in recognizing that. There's value in having conversations around that. And so I do encourage you to go check out her podcast, connect with her on Instagram. As always, the links are down below. You can find all the information in the show notes, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast player. If you want to get a hold of me, you can, of course, get my links down below. zoologyrick.com is my website. You can also click on send fan mail. If you're listening to this podcast on a podcast player, the very first link at the top is send fan mail. So if you don't do social media, you don't want to connect on Instagram or anywhere else, you can go ahead and connect with me right there. If you do want to connect on Instagram, Animals, Nature, and You does have its own Instagram handle too, so you can check that out if you want. So with that, right before we wrap this up, I do want to remind you, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening or watching. That way you are sure to catch the next episode. We have our 10-Minute Tuesdays, which are the solo episodes talking about a fun fact or animal species. Just me coming in around 10 minutes on that episode. And then every Thursday, just like this episode, an awesome interview with an awesome person doing amazing work. So with that, we are going to wrap it up now. Have a good one, everybody.